with the latest on the corporate front, all the market trends, expert opinion, and sound business advice. It is your unique window into the business world, direct from the heart of China.
Hello and welcome to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Coming up, we will have half an hour of business news and analysis. On today's show, the Dragon Boat Festival holiday sees travel and consumer spending surge. What are the new trends? And DeepSeek updates its R1 AI model. What does it say about China's AI potential? And now let's begin with our top story. This year's Dragon Boat Festival boosted travel and consumer spending across China. China saw 190 million passenger trips, a yearly increase of 5.7%. The country also saw 6 million cross-border trips. Around 231,000 foreign nationals entered the country visa-free, 60% more than last year. Meanwhile, China's consumer goods trade-in program has generated 1.1 trillion yuan in sales in the first 5 months of this year. So for more on China's new consumption, join us on the line now are Professor Qu Qiang from Minzu University of China, Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics, Peking University, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. So Li Lun, I will start with you. What are some of the new tourism and consumption trends for this year's Dragon Boat Festival holiday?
So this year is a bit special because the Dragon Boat Festival, coincides with the Children's Day, the June 1st, festival for children. So we're seeing a lot of, traditional cultural events, especially the family-friendly ones where you can bring your children and, of course, the family members to participate. For example, we're seeing, all kinds of events around the country. For example, with children can make zongs or fragment bags with their families. Museums are having knowledge contests, other cultural events that attract the whole family. So we're seeing another trend for this year's Dragon Boat Festival holiday is that we're seeing a high growth in the provinces where the cultural events of the highest intensity. For example, the top 3 provinces with the highest growth in traveling are Guangdong, Xinjiang, and Guizhou. So Xinjiang, of course, with this new high-speed highway built is one of the reasons why it's popular. But Guangdong and Guizhou are both provinces with traditional, for example, dragon boat racing and other cultural events that attracts families to attend. So we're also seeing, for example, short trips abroad. So according to our immigration bureau, the travelers per day for the Dragon Boat Festival is around 2 million for this break. So we're seeing a lot of people going to, for example, Japan, Malaysia, almost all countries within a 3-hour travel destination. So we're seeing a very high-speed growth in these travel destinations.
And Professor Qu Qiang, China is rich of cultural heritage and traditions, and that's why a lot of people are shifting their consumption from products to those featuring traditional and cultural elements. So what's your observation of that?
I think that's a very important trend in one country's consumption, because when a country's GDP per capita or their living standard reached a certain threshold, I think people will actually, feel more confident, and also they want more of the self-recognition to their own local culture, and they feel proud of it. So they will upgrade their structure of the consumption. So from the basic need, what we call the very high Gini coefficient kind of a consumption, to low Gini coefficient, consumption. So we will see people are tending to buy less and less food, less and less of the clothes, and then less and less of the designer bag and the famous brand of the clothing, but rather to consume and the culture and the tourism and the holidays. For example, spending time with the family, go to the museum, go to the exhibitions, try to savor, all kinds of the painting, all kinds of the ancient, relic shows. And that kind of the things will actually, make people feel better and more satisfactory towards their spiritual need.
And so, yeah, as part of efforts to rebalance the economy towards greater consumer spending, China has been rolling out a series of measures to boost the consumption. For example, China's consumer goods trade-in program. So how have all these, programs or measures helped to spur the domestic demand?
Well, we know that the consumer goods trading program has been quite successful. For the first 5 months of this year, it has generated 1.1 trillion yuan value in terms of the sales. So this direct stimulus program, I think it's helpful in boosting consumption, even though some of the critiques argue that this is simply made people buy the things earlier than they otherwise would have. So it's not really a net increase. But I would argue the opposite. I think, as a matter of fact, there are consumers on the margin. They may or may not purchase the products that they've been thinking about, but this trading program definitely gives them that one last push and really incentivize them to make the purchases. Not to mention, I think the money that they are able to save due to the subsidies can be spent elsewhere. And also the current consumption will be boosted. That could generate a healthy and positive cycle of more consumption, more expansion of production, jobs, income, and that could cascade into future increase in consumption and so on. So I do think these kinds of trading programs are useful. Now, that said, I also think that the government does not stop at just the direct sort of stimulus in the consumption, because we know consumption is largely dependent on income, on wealth, and also on the confidence level. So that's why the government has implemented a slew of policies. For example, fiscal policy that increase pension payouts, it increased public investments to grow the economy, create more jobs. It reduced the deed tax to facilitate housing transactions. So all of these are helpful. And on the monetary side, policies have been implemented to stabilize the housing market, the equity market. So that helped to boost consumers' confidence and their wealth level. Also, the policies have been lowering, interest rates, mortgage rates, and all of these also help to stimulate consumption. In addition to that, there are also employment-first strategies, protecting private enterprises to help to boost jobs and income. And so I think all of these are very helpful, with both direct stimulus, but also a more holistic approach to help income growth, to help wealth stabilize, and also help to boost people's confidence by providing, better social safety net.
And there is a recent McKinsey report saying that Chinese consumers are shifting spending to products and services that help them achieve personal fulfillment. So what do you think about this trend?
Well, I think this trend is quite expected. On the one hand, I think I agree with what Professor Chi has talked about earlier, that with people's income rising, with their needs have been changing, people do want to consume more products that would give them more self-fulfillment. And that is also vindicated, I think, by, Abraham Maslow's theory that he put forth back in 1943 about a hierarchy of needs, right? So when people's incomes are low, they spend mostly on just physiological needs like food, shelter, and clothing. But as their income level grows, people are starting to have more needs that are trying to please themselves, try to make themselves feel good. And so I think that's what we're seeing right now in China, that there's this long-term structural improvements in their income level, in people's spiritual lives. And so they want to spend more on certain services. Like in the McKinsey report, they surveyed 13,000 consumers. And what consumers say they will want to increase their spending on are education, health products and services, travel, dining out, pets, aesthetic medical services, personal and home care, sports apparels. So all of these, as you can see, don't just satisfy very basic needs of the people. They really help them to have a sense of feel good, to allow them to have the self-fulfillment. So those are the products that most people say they would increase spending on. And what they would spend less are things like alcohol and tobacco, and also some consumer appliances. Interestingly, I think they already have enough of those. So I think that is, it's an interesting trend. And I think that also, in a way, signals that the service consumption still has a very large room to grow.
And Li Luan, actually, one very interesting example is that the domestic IP toy market that is really booming. For example, the Pop Mart Labubu lines sells really well. They said they are sold out globally. So what do you think is driving their explosive popularity in China and around the world?
Yeah, so Labubu is quite, the phenomenon right now. So part of the reason for that is its scarcity. So, it's for the, especially their hidden, styles that you have to buy repeatedly in order to have a higher chance of getting. So there's, the gamification element in it. So it's fun to buy. It's also, it's basically combines the attributes of a product and also an experience because there's excitement of opening the blind box. There's also, I think, boosted, additional boost by social media. Celebrities are kind of, having them, sharing them on social media. So this kind of create a trend globally. I think Labubu are sold out everywhere. There are even, shoppers from abroad who travel to China, especially to buy products. So I think it's going to be a very good example for, Chinese brands to kind of create its influence globally and to expand its sales through these innovative products and honestly like experiences.
So, Yan, the Financial Times actually recently published an article titled, "Don't Underestimate the Chinese Consumer." So what's your understanding of the Chinese consumption market?
Well, I think this article did a good job in debunking the myth in the Western narrative that gives a sense that the Chinese consumption market is collapsing because this really serves certain agenda, right, of the Western world that basically says China is having the so-called overcapacity problem, that the production is so high, the domestic demand is so weak, and so China has to export a lot of those products. But I think what this article has shown is that the Chinese consumption has been growing very steadily in the past 2 decades. It actually had an annual growth rate of 9%, which is almost, triple the world average, about 3% growth, and far outpaced other countries' consumption growth. So in that sense, I think it's very clear that as China's disposable income grows, Chinese people have the money to spend and their consumption level is rising. China has, 400 million strong middle class, and their consumption market is large and expanding. So I think there's a lot of potential. Now, that said, I do think that there's still room for consumption to continuously improve in a healthy way. And also as the government rolled out many supportive policies. And so all of these give people the confidence. And again, according to the McKinsey report, actually 3/4 of the respondents, they feel confident about the Chinese economy, and 63% of the correspondents feel confident in their personal and their household financial status. So we see the rebound of the confidence. So I think that would continue to help to stimulate Chinese consumption market, and that would help to not only validate investment growth and continue to drive GDP growth, but also help to improve people's living standards.
And if you take a look at Chinese retail markets, China is probably one of the largest markets in many areas, like vehicles, like smartphones, as you mentioned. And in the first 4 months of this year, the retail sales expanded by 4.7% year on year. So how do you look at this growth, and which sectors are leading the growth?
Right. So definitely, China is a very large consumer market with 400 million middle class consumers. And this market is also growing. The Chinese consumption is growing at about 9% annually in the past 2 decades before the COVID in 2019. And so the market is expanding, and definitely this trading program has helped to provide some extra boost for consumption. And so when you look at the sectors that are doing very well for household appliances and audio video equipment, it has gone up by about 25% from January to April this year compared to the same period last year. There's also the furniture, telecommunication equipment, and others. And all of these really are benefited from this trading program. And besides that, I think we're also seeing a lot of consumption in the services that are really booming, like tourism, like dining out, and all of these, I think, showcase that there's a very strong impetus for for the Chinese consumption market to continue to grow in a sustainable way.
And Professor Qu Qiang, so consumption is a means to grow the economy as a way to validate investment growth. So how do you compare the U.S. and Chinese consumption models?
Well, I think China and the United States have very different model for the consumption. I think America, they adore one model that is got the pre-consumption, which means they are using their credit card and they, prepay for everything they're probably going to need in the future. So actually, their consumption rate is very high. Well, we're not saying which one is better or not, but in America, their consumption's contribution to their GDP growth is actually very, very high compared to actually many countries in the whole world. Even though American society, they don't have quite a good, social security system, not like European Union. So this has actually become a very, interesting phenomenon. Even in Europe, even in Japan, their social security system is much, much better than the United States, but people's consumption rate is still not as high as the United States. But for China, I think people are more rational in the regard of the consumption.
So how do you compare the U.S. and Chinese consumption models?
Well, I think the two are very different. I think what China tries to promote is healthy and sustainable growth of consumption, and that would help to serve the ultimate purpose of living living standards. So the consumption needs to be backed by income growth, and again, it needs to be healthy. Whereas in the US, I think right now there is too much consumption. There is excessive consumption. There is the culture of consumerism. And a lot of this consumption is not really supported by healthy income growth. So the US households are basically swimming in debt. They collectively owns $18.2 trillion, $1 trillion debt. And mortgage is about 70% of that. And so there is the rising credit card, auto loan delinquency rates, which is continue to increase since 2022. And they're paying 11% of the disposable income just to service their debt. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's not a very healthy way of consumption. And it's not, I also think that actually creates more psychological harm than good to many of the Americans, because to be able to support a consumption, they have to work multiple jobs. And some of these consumption also are not necessarily discretionary, meaning they just have to pay a lot on their housing, on their rental services, close to 35% of their income for many households. And they're also paying very, very expensive healthcare bills. So all of these, I think, in a way, would create this sort of work and spend cycle. And again, it's not really healthy consumption, nor is this a sustainable consumption pattern.
Well, we're speaking with Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University, Professor Qu Qiang from Minzu University of China, and also Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics, Peking University. And after a short break, DeepSeek updates its R1 AI model. Stay with us.
Welcome. I'm Elaf Elad, Economics Professor and member of the Data Science and AI Center at New York University, Shanghai. On the World Today program, you can find in-depth and impartial insight, as well as critical commentary on key trends in the Chinese economy, financial technology, business, and blockchain. To prepare for the world tomorrow, join me on World Today.
You're listening to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Chinese AI startup DeepSeek has released a new version of its R1 reasoning model, marking its first revision since its debut in January. The company said the new model matched the performance of top global competitors, including OpenAI and Google. So, actually, what are some of the new features of this, DeepSeek update model?
So this new version delivers major performance improvements in both, complex reasoning. For example, in some of the very competitive math competition, it scored much better than last time. It also had a very significant improvements in terms of its coding and logic performances. And so, like you just mentioned, these are, really outperforming some other competitors like OpenAI's GPT 4.0 and Google's Gemini in some of these very important areas. And I think also to know that just like the earlier version, it is much quicker to train. It is also much less costly to train. And so all of these gives it a very distinct advantages compared to its other competitors.
And so, Professor Xu Qiang, what are some of the applications for the generative AI to date?
Well, I think the application is in the content creation. For example, right now, we've been seeing that many literature writing can be generated by AI. So basically, if you give them one theme, one style, and describes one of the plot, and they can create some very readable literature a piece of work. So, or at least to provide some, inspirations and assistance for the writers. In the art creation, I think the generative AI can create all kinds of the, painting, music, and, videos. And also you can do that with game innovation, gaming innovation, and also customer service, your virtual assistant, and your mobile phone. So everything you can imagine can be helped with AI. So I think creating the contents has become a most important business model and the profiting or the cash model right now for many companies of AI.
And Yan, so from your perspective, how close are China and the United States on the AI potential and AI development?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think if you look at the industrial sort of the experts, when, for example, OpenAI's CEO and also the AMD CEO, Lisa Su, when they were at the congressional hearing, what they were saying is that, China's AI development is still behind, but really not very far. And I think you hear different people saying either the US is 6 months ahead or 3 months ahead. But I think the consensus is really that the US is not really having a huge advantage when it comes to the AI, foundational model development. And I think if we look at the current Chinese performance, and again, as I mentioned earlier, that this new version of DeepSeek, it has strong reasoning abilities, but more importantly, it also has very transparent, licensing. It is available under the MIT license. It gives the developers, the open source platform. So it allowed them to use, to modify, and to deploy the model how they like. So, a company like, I don't know, Alibaba, well, they have their own AI system, but they could integrate, DeepSeek into their platform and design the users to their own, liking, to their own fit. And also, the faster development cycle. Like I said earlier, DeepSeek's first version only took 55 days to train. And this new version also, came out quite quickly. So these are all very unique advantages. And in terms of cost effectiveness, I think that it's even more important that, the DeepSeek first version costs about $5.5 million to train, whereas OpenAI took $80 to $100 million to do so. When you look at the output, cost, for example, DeepSeek is only charging 30 cents per 1 million token. And for the OpenAI, it is ChatGPT 4.0. I think it costs about $60 for the same 1 million token. So you can see the cost advantage of the Chinese model and its OpenAI sources. And so I think that is the open sources. And so I think that really gives a lot more advantages, because it's not just in terms of how well these foundational models perform, but also how well these foundational models can be used for influence and also to be adopted. So I think China has very unique advantages in terms of the AI diffusion. So it can be applied in many different industries. It can be also modified and improved and deployed in many different ways in a cost-effective and also a very rapid adoption cycle. So I think all of these would mean that the Chinese AI industry is really having a great advantage. That said, I do think that the US's current chip restriction and also the the software for design restrictions would have some impact, negative impact on the industry. But I think over time, this would only spur more the Chinese own innovation ecosystem and to be able to really develop its own entire AI ecosystem.
And what do you think about China's potential in AI in terms of talents?
I think, first of all, we know that, China graduates 1.4 million STEM students every year. That's 4 times the US. And according to Jensen Huang, China has 50% of the global AI talents. And so that just shows that, the talent pool is very solid, it's very plentiful in China. And China also has very large markets, for AI users. And so I think, when you have the necessity, you always create the demand, you always create the innovations and the adoption of the technology. And it's quite interesting when you listen to the White House, for example, David Sachs, who is the AI and security czar under the Trump administration. He defines the US's win in the AI technology as the US is able to occupy 80 to 90% of the global market. But what is interesting is, they wanted to cut China's access of the US's AI chips and so on. And that basically means that they are losing 50% of the global market. So just by simple math, the US can't win the AI race by their definition if they're trying to cut China out of that, AI system.
Well, we're speaking with Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University, Professor Qu Qiang from Minzu University of China, and also Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics, Peking University. And that's all the time for this edition of Biz Today. To listen to this episode again or to find more previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching for Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening.